What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Bats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. We have breaking news. Well, it's breaking at least as we're recording this. It won't be breaking by the time you hear this. Nonetheless, we will be breaking down the Malcolm Butler signing by the New England Patriots. What does it mean? How does he help? What more do the Patriots have to do defensively? Are they done adding corner? I tell you what I am hearing. We're also going to be going over this Tyreek Hill deal to the Miami Dolphins, what this means for the league, what this means for the value of draft picks moving forward. The number of draft picks that have been expended by the Dolphins for receivers the last couple of years, absolutely astronomical. And then we continue our receiver conversation with a tremendous guest. It's Greg Cosell, NFL Films for 40 plus years, the creator and co-host of the NFL Matchup Show. You've seen it for years on ESPN. Nobody breaks down the film like Greg Cosell, and we're asking him specifically about receivers. Now, the bigger, faster, more explosive types of receivers, because that's my understanding what the Patriots are looking for this offseason. They obviously haven't, at least as of yet, signed anyone with that profile. So might they be looking for that kind of player in the draft? Greg Cosell goes over 3 names that he really likes, that he sees as talented pieces, not perfect prospects by any means, but players that the Patriots perhaps could be calling day 1, day 2 of the draft. So great episode lined up for you today. Let's get to it. First things first, this Malcolm Butler signing. Okay, so he's 32 years old. He's coming off a year away from football. He stepped away from the Arizona Cardinals, citing personal reasons. He takes his time. Now he's ready to come back. He visits the Patriots just a few days ago. They get a chance to look at him, see how he's moving, talk with him, see what he's been up to, but really assess whether or not this guy is someone who can help them at a clear position of need. Arguably their most glaring need going into Wednesday afternoon. You could argue it remains a glaring need for the New England Patriots because, again, a year away from football, into his early 30s, it's impossible to say exactly what Malcolm Butler will give the Patriots in 2022. But talking to a few league sources about Butler, specifically to people who have scrutinized his 2020 film with the Tennessee Titans very closely, here's what they tell me. Twitchy, still good instincts, still good ball skills, someone who still has good quickness. So in short, not all that different a player than the player you as Patriots fans last saw here in New England. That was always Malcolm's game, the ability to react quickly, to cut down on the number of steps that it took him to click and close, quote unquote, where he is reading the play out, reacting, and able to get downhill, whether it's to break up a pass or to play the run. That's what made Malcolm Butler such a valuable piece to this Patriots secondary for several years. The long speed is not necessarily his game. It wasn't necessarily his game even as a young player, but especially now at 32, it's safe to say, and this is what I've been told, quicker than fast, certainly at this point in his career. So are we going to get some phenomenally entertaining press conferences or phenomenally awkward press conferences moving forward with Bill Belichick and or Malcolm Butler and or Matt Patricia in the coming months? Yes, of course, that's on the table. But I do feel as though this is a prototypical Bill Belichick move in a number of ways. Number one, low cost, could still potentially, if he's the player he was in 2020, this is what I've been told. If he's that guy, that's a starting caliber corner. That's somebody who you can put in there. Is he a number 1 lockdown type of player? No, not necessarily. But can he give you starting caliber cornerback play along the boundary? Again, exactly what the Patriots needed, what they needed most. Somebody opposite Jalen Mills. Maybe Terrence Mitchell can complement whoever the 2 starters are, but you're not going to be leaning on Juwan Williams. You're in all likelihood not going to be leaning on Sean Wade, who you're still letting develop and seeing how things play out there after acquiring him right before the season last season. That's your outside cornerback group at this point. Jonathan Jones, Miles Bryant, they've got the slot covered. On the outside, a lot more question marks. But if you get Malcolm Butler from 2020, he's a starting caliber player. Bill Belichick looks like a genius for acquiring a starting caliber corner at a low cost. And maybe he even drafts someone in the 2022 draft. You allow that player to develop, then he can take over, whether it's for Mills or for Butler moving forward. But right now, that's what you're hoping if you're the Patriots, is that Malcolm Butler can at least compete for one of those starting cornerback jobs. Again, at a very low rate. $9 million is what this contract is potentially worth. So we'll get the details on the deal later, but it's going to come down in terms of the guarantees, and the expected value of the contract is probably going to be significantly lower than that, is what I would imagine. The other reason this is a prototypical Bill Belichick acquisition is because he just doesn't care about the optics. He doesn't care about the press conferences. He doesn't care about the conversations that we will have on Early Edition, on Boston Sports Tonight, on the Patriots Talk podcast, everywhere for the next several months, based on Super Bowl 52 and why did he only play one special team snap and why was Johnson Batamosi in the game. We've already had those conversations even before he signed. That stuff had started percolating because we heard that Malcolm Butler was in town making a visit to the Patriots. So that will continue. But Bill Belichick, if he feels like it's something that's going to help his team, no matter what the optics are, no matter how awkward it might be, if it might be awkward at all, I should point out, both sides, Bill Belichick and Malcolm Butler, have done nothing but play nice since Malcolm Butler's departure, have had nothing but nice things to say about each other, have not even hinted as to why Malcolm Butler didn't play in Super Bowl 52. None of the details, none of the behind the scenes stuff that I think Patriots fans are dying to know. I know Patriots fans are dying to know what happened that night. I know there are Patriots players that are dying to know what happened and why Malcolm Butler didn't play more in that game. I remember talking to players right after the game and being told, we knew he wasn't going to start. That was in the plan all week. We did not know he was not going to play. That was not part of the practice plan. So what happened? Why the change? Those questions will continue to be asked. Now, here we are 4 years later, 2018, right? Early 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 5 years, 5 years later. That part of it is remarkable to me. It's juicy for a lot of people, whether you're going to enjoy it or not, to each their own, but that's going to happen. And yet Bill Belichick goes ahead and makes this move anyway, because he feels like it will help his football team, or that it could help his football team. Let's get into how this relates to the Tyreek Hill signing and trade by the Miami Dolphins. All kinds of draft capital being expended by the Dolphins. First round picks, second round picks. It's absolutely bananas, the compensation that the Dolphins gave up, both in draft capital and about to make him the highest paid receiver in NFL history, to make sure that they acquired this guy. Now, he is a game changer. But if you're asking me right now, who is this trade going to work out for more, the Chiefs or the Dolphins? I got to lean the Chiefs right now, just because I have faith in the way they're constructed, even though their drafts have not been excellent by any means in the last few years. But the quarterback there, I think that ends up being the side that you bet on, turning this into something. You have all this draft capital now. The receiver classes are so deep year after year after year in the draft. Can they not? Listen, nobody's going to replace Tyreek Hill's skill set, but can you not make this work? Can you not make yourself a better team at the end of the day with everything you've now acquired, whether it's money freed up to be able to spend other places or draft picks, than the Dolphins can by plopping Tyreek Hill into the mix and hoping it works out? Now, don't get me wrong. It does make this Dolphins offense much scarier, especially when you consider Jalen Waddle is there and you look at Mike Gesicki at tight end, you look at Chase Edmonds at running back. They have some real pieces there. They have some real weapons. And if you're a Patriots fan, you're still hoping the hair grows back on your head after you tore it out, watching the Patriots late last season play the Dolphins twice, lose to the Dolphins twice, and lose on plays that feel like they would be absolute nightmare plays with Tyreek Hill now in the fold of Miami. I'm talking about those zone coverage, off coverage drops by the Patriots secondary with the Dolphins running very simple slants over the middle, RPOs, quick hit stuff with Tua Tagovailoa. That is his game. He's a point guard. That's what he is as a quarterback. I'm not sure the offense itself, even with Mike McDaniel there now, is going to change all that much. The running game may. I'm not sure I see a lot of deep shots coming from Tua Tagovailoa down the line. He's not built for that kind of offense, in my opinion. But even if it remains RPOs and quick hitters and bubble screens and very collegey looking offense, you put Tyreek Hill in there. Is there a better catch and run receiver in the NFL right now? You put Jalen Waddle in there, who's, I would say, Tyreek Hill light. That's a really dynamic receiver group that the Dolphins now have. And so how does Malcolm Butler help with that? Well, he would help again if he's a starting caliber corner, if he's that guy from 2020. But again, I'm just going back and forth with a few different league sources before we come on the podcast here. The Patriots still need speed on the field. They still needed more speed on the field before the Dolphins acquired Tyreek Hill. Now they've acquired Tyreek Hill, and you've acquired a corner who's 32 years old and quicker than he is fast at this point in his career. So are you better off? You're better off because you have a starting caliber corner, potentially. You at least have another body to add to that mix to compete for that job. But is he just taking a roster spot from somebody who might have a little bit more juice, who might allow you to match up a little bit better with Miami, with Buffalo, to chase around these offenses that are just in your division? Don't even think about what's going on in the AFC West or the AFC North. Think about your division, the teams you have to beat to ensure that you get to the postseason. Do you have enough speed to compete with those offenses? That to me is a real question right now, because Malcolm Butler doesn't necessarily help you in that department. Jalen Mills is not a burner. Jonathan Jones can only be in one place at one time. He's arguably your fastest player. To get him back off of injury last year will be big for the New England Patriots. But he can't cover both Waddle and Hill at the same time. He's not going to be able to cover Jamison Crowder and Stephon Diggs. You're going to have to figure out how to piece this thing together, and you're going to have to figure out how to get faster defensively, because think about this. This is what we all were saying at the end of last season. They got to figure out a way to get faster, And think about the additions they've made on that side of the ball. You added Terrence Mitchell, sort of a journeyman cornerback, not necessarily a speed guy. You did add Mack Wilson at the second level of your defense. Okay, so your linebacker room looks like it's gotten a little faster. He's a good athlete, good lower body explosiveness, good power, aggressive player, downhill player, good short area quickness. These are all things that I've heard about Mack Wilson. We went over in the last podcast, talking to people in Cleveland that absolutely love the guy, that see him as an ascending player, actually, just blocked out on the depth chart. And they really liked Chase Winovich. Their analytics department especially really liked Chase Winovich. So it felt like a move for them to be made there. But that to me is the question now. Even before Tyreek Hill came to the division, you needed speed. Have you added enough of it? So where can they turn? There is still free agency. Speed at corner, not necessarily something that's there in abundance in free agency. I'm going to be honest with you right now. Via trade, I just posted something on NBCSportsBoston.com. If you're looking for those lower level, more realistic Patriots style trades, going for players that are in the last year of their rookie contracts. So you're looking at this 2019 draft class. Bill Belichick has done this time and again and again. Trent Brown, Danny Shelton, Barkevious Mingo. Okay, that one didn't work out so great. Coney Ely. Okay, that one didn't work out so great. Kyle Van Noy comes to New England with just over a year left on his rookie deal. Keyshawn Martin, LeGarrette Blount, Akeem Ayers. The list goes on and on and on and on. These are the low-level, low-cost player in the last year of his rookie contract kinds of trades that Bill Belichick has executed countless times in the past. And so I laid out a couple of examples there for you. At corner, pertinent to our conversation right now, the name I list is Trayvon Mullen from the Vegas Raiders. Obviously, you got some friends over there. Do you make a call to Dave Ziegler and say, can we figure something out? Because this guy was a second-round pick in the 2019 NFL draft. He comes in, he starts 26 games his first 2 years in Vegas. He's 6'2", 200 pounds. He ran in the 4.4s in his 40. Good size, good athlete. Gives you some speed on the outside at that position. Gives you some youth on the outside at that position. A roll of the dice. This guy was the MVP, the defensive MVP of the national championship game his last year at Clemson. A sack, a pick, a forced fumble against Nick Saban's Alabama Crimson Tide. I can imagine the Patriots turning the tape on from that game a few years ago and saying, hey, if we could figure this out, wouldn't be a bad guy for us to go get. Now, he went off the board just before the Patriots traded up for Juwan Williams. So I look at that, and knowing how the Patriots look at their draft board and they consider their tiers of players, and when they start to see one tier dwindle a little bit and they want to make sure they get somebody from that player or from that tier, when there's a player they specifically really want and they're afraid they might not get him, that's when they make their moves up. When they move back, it's because there's really a bunch of names in their tier that they are considering, and they're confident they will get one from that tier by trading back and picking up extra draft capital. But I do look at, and I'm going to try to poke around a little bit more on Mullen, specifically and how the Patriots felt about him a few years ago in the draft. But he went off just before the Patriots traded up to go and get Juwan Williams. So did they like both of those players? Both of good size. Juwan Williams clearly taller. But did they like both of them? And when they saw Mullen go off the board, then they decided, hey, it's worthwhile to us to trade up and make sure we get Juwan. I'm curious about that, because I do think they would have looked at some of what he did in college, even though they're not a team that takes a lot of players from Clemson. I can't tell you the last time they drafted a guy out of Clemson. To me, he did look like a Patriots fit at the time. Pretty versatile skill set. Looked like he could play zone or man. And now he should be available. This is the reason he's on the list of players that I think could be considered in these types of low-level trades, not just because he's in the last year of his rookie deal, but also because he's now buried on the depth chart in Vegas. New regime comes in. They trade for Rock Ya-Sin from the Colts, starting caliber corner, and they sign Anthony Averett, a name that we mentioned on the podcast and on many of our TV shows as we were getting into free agency, because I know he was somebody that was on the Patriots' radar. Man-to-man corner from Baltimore, Alabama guy. No surprise to me at all that he ends up in Vegas, where the Vegas Raiders are going to value a lot of the same things that the Patriots do. So the Patriots couldn't get him. Vegas did. Now Vegas has two new starting caliber corners, and they've got Trayvon Mullen, who played only 5 games last year, dealt with a toe injury. It looks like he's going to be a little bit buried. So would the Raiders be willing to give up a day 3 pick? He's only got 1 year left on his contract, and send him to New England. Be keeping my eye on that. The other name that I have in mind is at the receiver position, because I would say maybe right now that they've added Butler, there's not as much urgency for the Patriots to add a corner. They could still certainly do it in the first round of this year's draft. They could still certainly do it with Trayvon Mullen or anybody else in trade. But there's not as much urgency there. And to me, now perhaps the position that is of greatest need for the Patriots is at wide receiver. I still believe they're looking for size and speed at that position. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, as we're recording, is still available. Julio Jones, who I've been told not to rule out. You know, if the risk is 0, if the guarantees are 0 or thereabouts, that's a big if. I understand with Julio Jones, maybe he's got more out there for him than that. But that's not a name we should rule out for the Patriots. Size there. I would say enough speed when he's on the field. It's the question of the availability, which is a real question for him. Odell Beckham, another guy, obviously dealing with injury right now, just tore his ACL. But is that a quote-unquote value play you could make in free agency? So there are some names out there for the Patriots to add at this position. But if they're looking for size and speed, Darius Slayton, again, low level, last year of his rookie contract, 2019 draft pick, 5th round, ran a 4.39 at the combine, coming out of Auburn. Incredible jumps, better than the 90th percentile in both his vertical and his broad jumps coming out of college. Really good athlete, 6'1", really bad drops issues. has had some injury issues as well. He's dealt with hamstring, he's dealt with shoulder, but had over 700 yards his first 2 seasons, rookie season and second season in New York. Last year, again, buried on the depth chart. Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney, they both get added last offseason to the Giants. Darius Slayton essentially loses his job and has a rough year. Don't get me wrong. Pro Football Focus tracked him for having over 20% of his on-target targets dropped. Not what you're looking for. But does a change of scenery maybe do him some good? He would provide them a little bit of size and a lot of speed on the outside as the kind of player that would at least require a little extra attention from opposing defenses. Again, a day 3 pick, maybe the Patriots can get some value out of somebody like that in a trade. How about the draft, though? Let's get into the draft. Let's get into our conversation with our guy, Greg Cosell, because he has 3 names for us to be considering. One of them you'll be very familiar with if you follow this podcast. Another you will be pretty familiar with if you follow this podcast, because this is a player that I like. He may be gone by the time the Patriots are picking in the second round, but he's coming from a smaller program. He's an elite athlete. I've called him the Kyle Duggar, the offensive version of Kyle Duggar in this year's draft class. Then there's a third name that I'm not sure we've mentioned at all on the Next Pats podcast. He did get a mention in my prototypical Patriots piece from last week on receivers, as he should. Freaky athlete. But I will let Greg Cosell tell you all about him. It's one of his favorite under-the-radar players in this year's draft class. Great conversation with Greg Cosell, NFL Films, NFL Matchup Show. First, let's take a quick break, and then we'll get to our interview with Greg Cosell. All right, there he is, Greg Cosell. Greg, thanks so much for being with us here on Next Pats.
Phil, pleasure to be with you.
Wanted to ask you first, Greg, about your thoughts on Mac Jones. And we know the 2021 season is certainly in the rear view at this point, but what the Patriots do this offseason will be colored by how they feel about Mac Jones, where they think he needs help. And obviously how he goes is how the team will go moving forward. But watching as much film as you do, what did you think of Mac Jones in year 1?
I don't think, Phil, there was a lot of mystery to Mac Jones. I think we knew what he was, and that's the way he played. I think he's very good before the snap of the ball. He understands what he's looking at. He's very efficient. He knows where to go with the football. I think he navigates the pocket very well because he's not a strider and he can throw the ball without really having to stride. He can actually work in contested pockets pretty effectively, and he's precisely accurate. His ball placement is consistently good. So I think we knew all this going in, and that's the way he played. And he's going to be the Patriots quarterback. It's a matter of what they do around him.
When you watch him, Greg, do you feel like, well, first of all, I guess just in general, do you feel like watching as much football as you have watched over the years, can arm strength be improved, number one? And number two, if it doesn't improve for Mac Jones, how limiting might that be for the Patriots as an offense?
It can be improved. My guess is because of the way in which he throws it. He's not a strider. He's not really a torque thrower that gets his body into it. He's kind of a snap, compact thrower. My guess is it's not likely that his arm strength will improve in any meaningful fashion. But I think one of the strengths of his game is the fact that he can work in contested pockets, because even though I wouldn't call him immobile, he's certainly not going to make his bones in the NFL by running around. So he has to work effectively from the pocket. And one of the things that I'm sure he developed as he grew up playing the position was the fact that he's a short strider. He doesn't really need, like a Trevor Lawrence needs to stride into throws. Some guys need to do that. Mac Jones does not. So that's to his benefit. So normally when guys throw it like that, they're not going to really get much stronger with their arm.
That's really interesting. Almost thinking of it, for me, as someone who likes to play golf, isn't very good at golf.
No.
You think about these guys that take the shorter, compact swings, and they are, dialed in terms of hitting fairways and hitting greens, but you're not going to see the 320-yard drive from those guys off the tee either.
Yeah, no, I mean, but that's something he needs to do, because as I said, he's not truly a second reaction improvisational player. Can he run on occasion? Yes, he can. I mean, he's not a statue, but he's not really an extend the play quarterback.
So how do you help a quarterback like that, Greg? I know the construction of the Patriots roster. And that, again, that is fluid right now at this point in the offseason. But you're sitting in that Bill Belichick chair. What would you be looking to in order to maybe maximize what you're hoping to get out of Mac Jones in his second year?
Well, there's a number of things. Number one, some of it's on Mac, because you want to make sure that you continue to teach him what he's seeing before the snap, because the great quarterbacks, particularly the quarterbacks that are not mobile, you want this with every quarterback, but it's more important for quarterbacks that aren't mobile, is they have to win before the snap of the ball. And someone like Tom Brady was absolutely outstanding doing that. And I think Mac Jones has to get to that level where he wins before the ball snapped as much as is possible. And then the other things is then you need receivers, because you're going to get man coverage in the NFL. We know that. So you have to be able to have receivers that can win against man coverage, where Mac Jones feels comfortable delivering the football. That if you can't win against man, it's very difficult in this league to really have a consistent passing game on a week-to-week basis.
Well, and when it comes to receivers, something that I've gleaned this offseason, just talking to a few people, is that the Patriots would like to get a little bit more size in that receiver room. And I think they would like to add someone, Greg, who at least threatens opposing defenses down the field. Having spoken to some coaches that game planned against the Patriots this past season, they really weren't concerned about getting beat deep. It was all about stopping that run game, stopping that short to intermediate passing game. And so I want to ask you about some of the receivers in this year's draft, because I know you're heavy into everything draft right now, but I know you've watched a lot of receivers as well. And there's one name that we've consistently brought up on this podcast because he's thought of as a first round guy, played in the SEC, seems like a Patriots fit if they're looking to get big and fast. And that's Treylon Burks. And I'd love to hear your take on Treylon Burks, because I think a lot of people have been sort of up and down on him, especially after he goes to the combine. He doesn't run quite as fast as I think people expected him to.
But he plays fast. I mean, I watched a lot of Treylon Burks, and he ran away from the Alabama defense, for instance, when you watch that tape. But he's big, he's physical, he's got big hands, he catches everything. You can line him up all over the formation. He's not specific to one place, so you can do multiple things with him. Would I call him a speed burner? No, but I think he can get vertical. He did in the SEC. And he's a physical presence. So Treylon Burks, to me, is a really, really good prospect. He's more, to me, of a complete receiver. If you're just looking for pure speed, he may not be the guy you're interested in, but I think he gives you a lot within the context of a multiple offense.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to see how he's used wherever he is at the next level, because you hear, Deebo Samuel's name brought up in conjunction with Burks every once in a while, because he did play some of the backfield at Arkansas.
Yeah, and I think you think of that, you think of a Cordero Patterson, you think that you can use him in that way. The question is, when you do get a player like Burks, do you want him to focus on one position so he can become really good at it, or is he that movable chess piece? And that's a function of the coaching staff. But I think he's a really good prospect.
There's another player, again, taller, longer, maybe a little bit leaner, and Christian Watson from North Dakota State, who goes to the combine and absolutely blows it up in terms of the 40 time and the vertical jump and the broad jump. And I don't think he's necessarily considered a first round player the way that I think a lot of people do with Burks. But what are your thoughts on Watson if the Patriots decided to wait maybe till the second round to go after a player like that?
Yeah, Watson is long and he can run. And that is self-evident. Now, I think he has a lot to learn to be a receiver. I think he has to learn, and this might sound crazy, how to catch the ball in certain kinds of throws. In breaking routes, I don't think he places his hands in the right way. So I think people get excited about him in the pre-draft process because he is tall and he can run. And when you put on his tape at North Dakota State against the schools he was playing against, it looked like he was playing against ninth graders. He just runs by them like they're not there. That won't happen in the NFL. In fact, when I finished watching his tape, the player he absolutely reminded me of coming out of college was Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Their height, their weight, and their speed in the 40 were essentially exactly the same. So again, we've seen Valdez-Scantling in the NFL, and we know that he's a certain kind of receiver. He's a speed guy. He's not a high-volume target guy, and he hasn't been certainly up to this point in his career. I would say Watson would probably fall into that category. He's a specific kind of receiver. He's probably not the guy who gets 130 targets in a season.
That makes a lot of sense. That the Valdez-Scantling comparison is a great one because, especially for us, we're looking at free agents now too. That's a name that's popped up in some of my discussions about guys the Patriots might be interested in. So not a true number one in terms of the focus of the offense and the number of targets, as you mentioned, but somebody who gives the offense a certain dynamic that
Correct.
maybe a team like the Patriots doesn't have right now.
Correct, because the one thing about players like that is what's the last thing defensive coaches want to do in the NFL is give up explosive pass plays. So it does impact how defenses play, and that becomes a big factor. And that could be very helpful to Mac Jones, who, even though he throws a nice deep ball, at his core, he's a rhythm timing, short to intermediate thrower, and that's predominantly how you want to structure your pass game. But a player like Valdez-Scantling, I don't know if Watson would be ready year one, to be honest with you, but I guess we'll find out, whoever drafts him. But I think that's what you hope when you have a speed receiver, Phil, is you have a receiver that forces the defense to have to play a certain way. You know that they're going to have to play a certain way, and that allows you to do other things. It opens up other things for the quarterback. And like I said, it would allow Mac Jones to know before the snap of the ball what he's seeing.
Last player I wanted to ask you about, Greg, is somebody who, like Watson, competed at the Senior Bowl, and like Watson, lit it up in Indianapolis. It's Alec Pierce from Cincinnati. I know you've watched him. It sounds like you might be a fan. Tell us what you know about Alec Pierce.
I really like Alec Pierce. Didn't know much about him at all until I put on his tape. His measurables were really good at the combine. I think that he plays big. I think he was close to 6'3". He's long, he's fast, he has stride length, he has body control and hands, he makes contested catches. There's a powerful feel to his movement. He was consistently strong defeating press coverage. He's a player that I really like. I mean, he's got stride length, body control, physical competitiveness, he's got hands. This is, for a lot of people who spend a lot of time talking about Drake London, I actually like Alex Pierce's tape and his NFL projection more than I like Drake London's.
Wow. So, I mean, Drake London is somebody I think some places have projected as, maybe even being a top 10 pick. So how comfortable would you be drafting Alec Pierce relatively early, maybe in those first two rounds there, Greg?
I would be very comfortable with him as a second round pick. He's a really good athlete. He's not purely explosive, but rare. I mean, Watson, you'd call him explosive. Pierce is not quite that level, but I like Pierce a lot as a complete receiver. Really good athletes, played a lot of sports, super competitive. I think he's one of those guys that in 3 years we're going to be saying, wow, Alec Pierce is a really good pro.
Well, that's why we have you on, Greg. I knew very little about Alec Pierce before talking to you now, but now I feel like I have to dive in to the tape and go see if he looks like a fit for this Patriots offense. Again, if they're looking for a little bit more size, somebody who can get down the field, threaten defenses down the field. Sounds like he's somebody.
Well, I know, because my buddy Matt Bowen, who I work with on the NFL Matchup Show, Alec Pierce is from where Matt Bowen lives, and he knows the family, and he's apparently a phenomenal kid, super competitive, has always been a great athlete, no problem with work ethic. I don't want to sit here and say he's a Bill Belichick kind of guy, because every coach obviously wants guys who have a great work ethic, not just Bill Belichick. But I mean, he certainly would fit that mold.
And for us, when we're trying to peg who they may be bringing in here, that's a name that we have to know for sure. Greg Cosell, NFL Matchup Show, NFL Films. Thanks so much for being with us and sharing some knowledge today.
Thanks, Phil. Appreciate it.
All right, there you have it. Treylon Burks, Christian Watson, and Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce, somebody we should be keeping an eye on during this pre-draft process. Maybe we'll be able to find out even a little bit more about him and his background as we move forward here. But a great conversation there with Greg Cosell. We want to thank him for being on the Next Pats podcast with us. Thank you all for listening to this week's edition of Next Pats. Malcolm Butler on the docket, Tyreek Hill on the docket. Lots going on, even though we are now solidly into the second wave of free agency here. So we appreciate you following along. I'm sure we will have more news to cover. I'll actually be down at the owners' meetings next week with our guy, Tommy Curran. So we'll be doing our shows from down there early in the week, Monday, Tuesday. We'll have quick slants from down there. We'll also be gathering all kinds of intel that we'll be able to share with you here on Next Pats. So make sure you're keeping an eye out for that. We'll talk to you very soon.